All right, welcome to this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. I'm your host, Will Christensen, and I am super excited. Ritu and I met, man, it's been several years ago at a Prosper show. I think it was like 2018 or maybe even just after that. We haven't
Yeah.
talked since then. And now we're on this podcast episode. So it's good to reconnect with you and excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so exciting to be on your podcast. And I totally remember the scene where we met, and it was at a party, it was outside, and it was like a bus turned into a bar kind of scene.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to you on one of those bar tables and just chatting about data and things like that. So yeah, it's really
Yeah.
cool that, we've, even though we hadn't been in touch this whole time, but, I see you around on LinkedIn and you've probably seen my posts as well. So
Yep.
it's really good to
Yeah.
be here talking about the great stuff your podcast is all about.
Awesome. Well, my first question to all of my guests is tell me a little bit more about why someone would want to hear from you. Obviously, you've got some PPC Ninja experience, and I'm sure there's a lot that'll come up in the episode about that. Why would someone want to hear from you about monetizing their mental capital?
Yeah, so my story is interesting because I was raised in India, a place where, we're taught to go to engineering college or to a medical school and basically do those set jobs, like become an engineer or become a doctor or an IAS officer in the government. But for me, it was like, being in the matrix for a long time. I was a little bit different, and I was wanting to experiment with other stuff. I actually started my Etsy business a long time ago in 2010. And I realized that, just selling physical products is not what my calling was. Like I wanted to go beyond that, and selling physical products was a stepping stone. And so I learned everything about marketing, trying to just get my product to sell, right? It was jewelry at the time. And, I learned so many things by listening to so many podcasts. Like I've been absorbing podcasts this whole time since 2010. So it's, gosh, a long time. And I've figured out how to convert some of those ideas that I pick up from other people and stitch them together with some of my own. And then I can build something new and, as you say, monetize it. So it's been an interesting journey for me that, I feel is hopefully helpful to other people. When you listen to another person's story, you're not just listening to 60 minutes of a podcast, you're actually listening to the distillation of like months and years of all that they've gone through, and they've kind of distilled everything and they're giving it to you in like this pocket-sized nugget. So yeah, hopefully that helps your listeners to stick around until the end to hear what I have to say.
Interesting. I like it. I like it. So let's dive in here. What's the first time you can remember monetizing mental capital? So
Mhm.
go back in time here. What's the
Yeah.
first time you can remember thinking, "Oh yeah, I definitely,
Yeah.
monetized mental capital in this way early on." And sometimes people talk about like a lemonade stand. It kind of varies across the
Mhm.
board.
Yeah, so for me, it was, when I used to live in Japan, this was a long time ago. I lived in Japan for 17 years. And so I was doing this job while I had a lot of free time. It was a standard school kind of job. Like I'm an engineer by background, but at that time I was, my son was little and I was basically working at his school. I was just helping out. And I got this job there as, in the tech department. So I had a lot of free time. I had my entire summer vacation because, it was a school. So like 2 months of vacation and stuff like that. So I picked up some interesting skills and I started, selling jewelry. And I sold them to a group of friends, and then I sold them at fairs and at, larger fairs. And then I started selling them on Etsy. And what I learned at that point was that, when you put up your products to sell, they're not going to sell themselves. You've got to do more to it. Like you've got to generate a buzz around it. How do people discover you? How do they find your products, right? There's a lot more required to make that one sale. And so I decided to do things around that. So there's these peripheral things that I started doing. Like I started a blog, and this blog was basically talking about, all these different materials that one could use to design jewelry.
Okay.
And then I started another blog, which was all about like arts and crafts and things like that. And so there was work I was doing. And then I was like, okay, well, I can just make this into a YouTube channel. So I started a YouTube channel where I would show them how I was making my pieces because, people were like, oh my God, how do you make these beautiful pieces? Like, how do you get the idea? Like, how do you do it? And so it was so much fun actually doing all of those other things that I realized, gosh, this is necessary. It's not just an option. I need to do this. I need to show people how the process is, like what the process is of making the stuff so that
Interesting.
people are interested in what you're selling, because then it's also simultaneously building your story, on the side, so I realized that that is essential almost to any brand that calls itself a brand.
Love it. So as you began to expand and look at that, you saw something. Now, how did you identify that people were interested enough to go out and do a blog? Or I think a lot of us have had the idea like, oh, I should start a podcast. Oh, I should start a blog. Oh, I should start a YouTube channel. What was it that made you? And I actually kind of want to fast forward too. So these became leverage points to sell your physical products as well. Like
Mhm.
how did the blog and the YouTube channel help you monetize mental capital?
Yeah, so it was that whole idea of, you're creating this ecosystem where people see you in many different places. They may not see you in all those places, but they might see you in one, and then they go and check you in another, and then they'll check your Instagram, and then they'll check your this and that. And when they see that you're doing all these things everywhere, you also have a YouTube channel, it kind of reinforces the brand that you're building, right? It's not just like you're not just selling one product, and you're not just a fly by night seller. You're actually invested in your brand, and that kind of lends itself to them trusting you, right? They know that, oh, she's legit, she's doing this, she's been doing this. And the reason why I think that works is because I was attracted to other people who were doing that. Like when I saw someone creating furniture, and they were showing how they're making it, and then they're saying, hey, you can buy this, I'd be like, oh my God, I love to buy that. Some people might branch off and say, oh, I'm just learning the skill and I'll make my own. That's fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. But there are some people who'll be like, okay, we love your process. We love how you do it. I want to buy this. Otherwise it's like, I can buy this from China, like what's the difference between just picking up something from a cheap store versus, picking it up from someone who's actually, putting in the hard work and has shown you how the whole thing works. So yeah, I
So
just think that's, yeah, it's pretty cool.
it's interesting because I've heard one of the things that small businesses can do to compete with large enterprise is educating. Right?
Hmm.
Like taking
Yeah.
your process, educating the client about how they could do it themselves, and then it becomes an opportunity where
Yeah.
they can come and connect with you. So I think there's lots of different people out there who have
Yeah.
lots of different ideas for a YouTube channel, for a podcast,
Hmm.
for a blog.
Yeah.
Now that you've done one of these successfully, where you or multiple sounds like of these successfully, imagining that I had several ideas on the table for things I could blog about, whether that's sourcing or creating new products or whatever that might be. How do I choose?
Hmm.
How do I
Yeah.
choose which idea? How do I choose whether my idea is which idea? And then two, how do I choose which one is most likely to be successful?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's true. It's a little hard to tell which of these, which is why I tried a few different before I settled on one. And this was a long time ago. I don't sell jewelry anymore, so I'm just telling you something that I did right in the beginning. So I had a few options. Should I just create a blog around, reporting about what's going on in the world of, let's say, jewelry, what other people are doing and how, or should I talk about the process of it, or the angle. But you know what, it's actually quite okay to start somewhere and then change course a little bit, fine tune that. People don't mind seeing you evolve, and that's actually pretty kind of, your transparency does help in them seeing you as a legitimate person. So I think it's fine to start in whichever area you feel most comfortable, and you let the data guide you. I'm all about data, so I think if the data shows that there's crickets, then switch and start something else. But if you think that you're getting traction, you can see what kind of people are coming, you can build on that. And there's no shame or harm in dropping an idea that you started. It's quite okay. So I would, fail fast, fail often. I've started and paused many ideas, and it's fine.
So if I had a list of ideas of different pieces, what would you do to identify which ones to test? And then what would you do? Like, how long would you test it before shelving it and putting it up and saying, yeah, that's not gonna go there?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be something that you're comfortable talking about. Like you've got a little bit of expertise in that area, and you can, of course, build on it. But if you have something that the average person doesn't have, that could be a good enough way of saying, okay, this, people need this, and I have it. They don't know how to get here, so let me show them the basics, and we'll start from there. So I think it needs to be something that you're comfortable with. It's not something that you can do outside of your comfort zone, I would say, in the beginning, unless you have help. And that's kind of complicated, right? So, yeah, I would start where I'm most comfortable and then go from there.
Got it. So if I'm looking across my ideas, and this is kind of interesting because one of the ideas of mental capital that I've had for a while, I love automation. I love hacks. I love like all the things that come with productivity and connecting. And I'm a little bit of a software junkie. Like I'm the guy who
Mhm.
like I'm scared to even look. I think I have over 300 apps installed on my phone,
We
and
might be competing. We might be competing there.
I've got. Ooh, this
Uh-huh.
would be an interesting game to figure out. Like I think I've got upwards of 30 or 40 Chrome extensions installed, and like just I'm
Yes.
constantly testing out new things from that category. And so I'm so passionate about what's there, and stuff is constantly coming in and falling out for what I end up using in the long term. Like, yes, I like that. I'm going to continue using it. No, I don't like
Yeah.
that. I'm gonna toss
Hmm.
it out. So I've got
Yeah.
this real passion. So you mentioned like stick with what you're comfortable with. I'm super comfortable in that
Yeah. Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And I've even like I've started my YouTube channel. It's called
Yeah.
Automation Hunter,
Cool.
and I'm like, found a name for it, and I've made several videos and pushed them out and looked at different pieces that way. So I'm definitely falling into the category of like, okay, very comfortable, cool. Now my next question is, how long should I keep trying it before I'm like, yeah, that didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing is, in the beginning, you're going to have crickets. Like you're not going to be able to gain much traction. So you do need to give it decent amount of time. Let's say, I'm just pulling out a number from my head. Let's say a year. Like just give it a fair shot for a year and see if you can, build up to it. And if like nobody's interested in what you're talking about, then maybe you want to, retire that and start something different. Consistency is key, I would say. Showing up, keep showing up till you see people interested in you. So when I was building up my LinkedIn presence right now, I have, I don't know, 10 or 15,000 followers or something like that. But when I started, like maybe 2, 3 years ago, when I seriously looked at LinkedIn, I said, okay, I need to grow this channel. Like I need to, there wasn't much engagement. Like in the beginning, it was like one or two people would like my posts, or the impressions were low. Everything was low, but then it started building up. There's also algorithm, blessings that I might have gotten on the way, where something snowballed into something, and slowly I started getting so much engagement. You've got to wait a certain point before things actually do take off. So don't give up before that. Maybe give yourself like 6 months to a year to try out something, and then if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. You move on to something else. The other thing I would say is that people perceive you as a certain, they kind of typecast you, right, in a certain way. They're seeing you as a particular type of person who talks about a particular type of topic. If you mix too many things in there, it can dilute your overall effectiveness. Like I've seen people who keep coming up with announcements of something new that they're starting, and it becomes tiring for the audience, us listening to them. Oh, so now you're trying something new. Oh, okay, so now you're trying this other thing, and then it doesn't feel like they're giving it their whole attention before they give up and try something else. So I would say be picky about what you start. It has to be something you're comfortable with. Give yourself six months to a year, and then you can decide whether you want to move on to something else or what.
Interesting. So 6 months to a year
Yeah.
And would you say like consistent posting every day? Like, so my idea is this. I'm just gonna throw it past you since you've
Yes.
done this successfully before. And I think this will be valuable for others to hear, how you respond to me, which is why we're going down this route. So Automation Hunter, I believe that I have a possible opportunity to do reactions. So think like, reaction, you've seen the post where like people are like reacting to dance videos or to different
Yes.
stuff, and people seem to connect with the person who's reacting because it's like, okay, yeah, I think I would react similarly, or they find an affinity there. So I'm very passionate, very excited about business software, and so I thought, what if I
Cool.
combined the two, and like whenever a new piece of software comes out, I'll record 10 minutes of me playing with it to like, oh my gosh, it has this feature, no way, it does this, oh, it does that too, I can't even,
Yeah.
no, that would change everything. Like that sort of
Yeah.
reaction software, and then hand that over to a team member that I have who can like chop it down to like, here's 30 seconds of highlights at the beginning of the 10 minutes so that people can kind of get the cliff notes. And then obviously if they want to watch the whole 10 minutes of reaction because there was something in there that they were like, oh my gosh. And I'm sure over time I would begin to come up with some sort of rubric that I would use to score the software and kind of look at those different pieces. But that's my concept. I haven't
Cool.
recorded any of those yet. Most of my Automation Hunter stuff is just hacks on productivity that I'm throwing out there right now.
Yeah.
When I come across something on ChatGPT that I'm like, oh wow, that was really cool, I didn't realize you could do that, I'll toss it
Right.
out there for people to look at. But that's my concept.
Yes. I love it. And the thing is that a lot of people will start a channel or a newsletter or something with the goal of like finally being able to monetize it, right? So, for example, there's, I don't know if you've heard of Kevin King's newsletter, right? The $1 billion
Oh,
or something.
we actually had an entire episode where Kevin King talks about
Really?
his like why he started it, like what
Yes.
like he went to a conference and they were talking about this in a different industry and how
Mhm.
well it was doing in that industry, and this person was talking about the newsletter and he was like, oh, we're doing that. And so he came back
Yes.
and started his newsletter, and what was fascinating was how he culled his list. Like he had a list of probably 20 or 30,000, and when he sent out that first email, if you didn't engage, you got taken off the list.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
so
Yes.
like
Yeah.
just super fascinating to watch him kind of
It
cull
is.
that down.
I agree. And so I've also recently started an AI for e-commerce newsletter, which is now in its 8th week. So it's been almost 2 months, slowly gaining subscribers and stuff like that. So I know I've learned a lot from Kevin's newsletter style, and I think he's able to monetize it now that it's been a whole year that
Oh
he's
yeah.
been running it. So
He
yeah,
he
I
he
mean,
told me he's able
yeah,
to, based on how if you're following his story with some of that this was
yes.
just a couple of weeks ago, well,
Mm-hmm.
I guess probably 2 months ago, that he
Sure.
was on the podcast talking about why he started and how he's monetized, and
Yes.
he said he's able to fill his like weekends and several other like if he gets individuals where they're talking about something specific in the industry, he can sell a sponsorship, and
Mm.
he's like, I never endorse anything that I haven't either tried myself or someone I
Yeah.
know really well has tried and it was successful. It's
Yeah.
not like I just met some random dude and he told me it was great and then I'm
Hmm.
talking about it. Like it's got to be like really solid stuff before he'll
Right.
even
Yeah.
allow it to be sponsored or look at
Yeah.
anything that way. So yeah, he's totally monetizing that thing.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, it's more like a funnel, right? It's a funnel for PPC Ninja. It's, all about AI. And I'm very passionate about data and AI and combining those two and improving our productivity and things like that. So, it serves as awareness as well. So it depends. Like monetization could take different forms. It could be either straight up cash or it could be leads. Both are super valuable. So yeah, I think there's many opportunities out there. We just need to spread out our hands and say, okay, I want to receive, you know. Yeah.
So this newsletter that you just started, did you already have like a seed list of people, like different emails that you've been collecting with PPC Ninja for a while?
Yes.
Are you trimming it down in the same way that Kevin did, or what's that look like?
Yeah, so I did have a seed list and then I kind of partnered with some of the influencers in the space and I kind of shared the newsletter with them. And then the other thing that I'm trying to do to kind of grow my base is to include industry figures because I have a section in my newsletter that says voices from thought leaders. So all the other people in the space who are talking about I am one by one introducing their words, and they generally give me 2 to 3 paragraphs. Some people give me a little bit longer text, 2 to 3 paragraphs on where they think AI for e-commerce is going, what's new, etc. So by introducing their words in my newsletter, I'm also growing my base. So that's another way of kind of collaborating and partnering and kind of growing your base. It's not just you alone, doing the whole thing.
And so with those other collaborators, how are you like when you do that, are you, hey, I'd love to have you in here. Why don't we collaborate and you can send a copy of my newsletter to your base with a spot where they can subscribe and I'll include you in my newsletter and they can obviously push back to yours and we can kind of do some cross pollination. Is that kind of what you're offering to them?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a little gentler form of that. Like I'm not asking them to, kind of share my newsletter with their audience per se, but I'm definitely asking them, if they would like to subscribe and I give them the link and obviously they want to see their own feature article in there. So they do subscribe and it's good quality people. I think Kevin was one of the earlier ones in on my newsletter that I introduced his,
His
approach to
thoughts.
like, yeah, his thoughts on Rufus and Cosmo and things like that. There's many people that have been on it, Max Sinclair, Brian Johnson, there's a few others as well. So, it's a natural thing. I'm not forcing the growth, but it's a natural kind of expansion that's happening, which works with my style. Like I'm not super pushy. I know I need to be a little bit more aggressive with how I increase my visibility and so on, but I'm not super pushy, right? I'm not actually doing what Kevin is doing in terms of, hey, I'm going to kick you out. Maybe I should just to make sure that my list is attentive and so on. But right now I've got 56% open rate. It's pretty good. I would say it's been like 8 weeks of 56% and above open rate. So as long as I can keep that up, I'm going to grow and I am going to be able to produce this content for a long, long time.
You reminded me of Kevin King's episode. He
Uh-huh.
literally said, if you don't click on some piece of content within the month, like if 30 days go by and you haven't clicked on anything, actually engaged, he takes you
Yeah,
off.
I know. I know. Yes, he does.
Which I was like, whoa.
Whoa.
What's funny is I
Uh,
actually have almost been testing it because I
yeah.
subscribed to his newsletter. It's like, okay, I want to see how long it takes for me to get unsubscribed here if I just open and look at things. And I don't think I've successfully not clicked because he writes such a good newsletter. I'm like, oh,
He
I gotta
does.
see what's going on there.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a good move on his part.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I don't know about you, but when you get one of his, does your thought
Mhm.
go through your brain like, oh, I better look at that and see if there's something to click on because otherwise he's gonna unsubscribe me? Like, do you?
At the back of my head, yes. Totally.
So
But that's because he has such a high bar. Like he does set things in a way that, people follow it. So I think he's the king for a particular reason, right? Which is like his consistency with how he's saying things and how he's actually doing it. So
well,
yeah, I do that.
It makes me realize that, I
Mm.
mean, you can't, he's not shy about telling people that that's
Yes.
what he
Hmm.
does. Like, I don't know that there would be a better way of like, I was trying to think of how to do that with a YouTube channel. Like, I don't know that you can unsubscribe people on YouTube, but like, I almost
Yeah.
want to be like, if you subscribe but don't actually interact with any of my videos, i.e., you haven't watched a video or commented on a video in less than 30 days, I'm taking you
Mm-hmm.
off my list. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, I don't even know how, if that's an automated thing you could do, but it really does
Yeah.
seem like a very interesting way of weeding out the people who are just going to sit and lurk in the
Yes.
background and getting people to actually engage with the content for what's there. And I mean, no faster way to understand, like we were saying, like 4 to 6 months, like spend 4 to 6 months seeing if you can get some traction.
Yeah.
If you did it that way, you'd probably know a lot faster
Mm.
whether or not you're actually being engaging enough to engage. Because like if
Yes.
I think I have like 26 subscribers right now. Woo! Um,
Hmm.
all 26 subscribers would be gone after the first month because I hadn't made anything that was engaging enough for them to click on. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, okay, obviously I'm off here. So the feedback loop kind of it
Yeah.
gets much smaller.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, the feedback loop. I love that. I totally subscribe to that kind of thinking. The feedback loop is the most important thing in confirming whether what you're doing is, on the right path or not. Yeah, I mean, if you're getting very low engagement, I would just compare it to my previous month and say, have I grown or have I dropped? If I'm declining or staying flat, then it's data that I'm going to just use and say, okay, either I change my game or I drop this thing and try something different.
I love it. So as you monetized mental capital in the form of creating these newsletters, creating these different pieces of what was there, the YouTube channels, what was the biggest barrier? Like as you think back over that journey, what was the biggest
Yeah.
barrier to growing or succeeding?
Yeah. So, okay. So let me talk in the context of this current newsletter, right? So it's been around for 8 weeks. I guess the biggest barrier I had to even get started is the commitment piece, because I know that if I don't show up, then it's gonna, fizzle out very quickly. I had to make a commitment to myself that I will show up every single week, same time, same day of week. It's got to be something that I'm willing to do without saying, okay, I need a break or things like that. So I think that was the biggest thing. I already had ideas. I already was playing with the AI. I still am. I'm exploring new things, testing new things. And so it was, I guess, the time was right because I had so much content to share. I still do, that I was like, gosh, I'm never going to run out of content. The space is like evolving so fast. There's always going to be things to talk about. Now, the only angle that I used, which was different and difficult, is that it's got to be something that an e-commerce seller can use. So it's AI for e-commerce. I don't want to just talk about what's out there because everybody's talking about what's out there. They're talking about Sora and then Runway ML and this and that. That's not my focus. My focus is, okay, how do you take these ideas and translate them into actionables? So one of
Mm,
my very first sections is practical use cases, and it's got to be in the context of e-commerce. So that was my, I guess, differentiator. And I think that's why people have stuck around and they like it, because I'm giving them stuff that they can actually use. Like last week's episode, or not episode, edition, I created a custom GPT that can be used by sellers to kind of or quickly fix the listings, to be compliant with Amazon's new rules that went live yesterday. Or anyway, I don't want to time this thing, but basically there was a GPT that I created, and I spoke about that, and so that was usable right away. And I already see the count going up. There's hundreds of people that have used my GPT right after I announced it in my newsletter. And then I think Kevin also announced my newsletter in his newsletter and said, hey, go use our GPT type of thing. So, I think the biggest, like you said, obstacle or hurdle was just in my own mind. Will I be able to sustain this or not? And I think I'm committed to sustaining it.
Beautiful. So figuring out a way to remain committed and lean through your own doubts about what's
Mm,
there. So I got to figure out ways to get around my own doubts about whether or not people would be interested in watching me react to business software. Got
yeah.
that. Got that. Um,
Yeah.
okay, now I want you to imagine that you can make a phone call, Rita, and it's Ritu, correct? I'm saying that right?
Ritu. Yeah.
Ritu. So
Ritu.
Ritu, I
Yeah.
want you to think back to making a phone call, and you're making a phone call back to that individual who's just getting started on these blogs, right? So this is
Mm.
this is back a ways.
Yeah.
What piece of advice would you give her now that might help her monetize her mental capital more efficiently? What
Hmm.
would you say if you could call her up right now and say, "Hey, you're
Yeah.
about to get started on this blog. You're about to tell people a little bit more about this jewelry.
Yeah.
Do it this way, or
Mm.
or consider this." What would you tell them?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I would tell her that, 9 out of 10 ideas will fail. That's just fact of life. So try more things. Don't don't give up on the first failure you have because you will have lots of them. So keep going. Don't give up. Use data. Keep going.
Interesting. Try more things. So I
Yeah.
think that kind of goes back to your whole like get out of your own way, get out there, fail faster,
Yes.
start sooner, be willing to take the risk that you're wrong because if 9 out of 10 things are going to fail, you've got to fail 9 times before you find the one that's actually working.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And in the case of the light bulb, it was 1,000 failures before it worked, right? So I would say that, it could be even longer. 9 out of 10 is just a way of saying it, but there could be many failures before you actually, finally start to see victory and you start winning in whatever you're doing. So keep trying. There's no shame or harm or loss in failing. Like it really doesn't matter. Nobody cares whether you fail at something. As long as you can keep bouncing back, just keep going, keep moving to the next thing.
Interesting. I love that. I think that's really, really powerful. So moving to the final part of our episode here, the question that I have is this. I'm going to give you actually two questions at the same time. I'm going to give you 60
Mhm.
seconds. We're going to imagine, Ritu, that you just stepped into an elevator and the guy next to you is like, "Hey, I'm an 8-figure seller on Amazon. What do you do?" And you get an opportunity to tell that 8-figure seller about anything you're working on. Could be PPC Ninja, could be any of these things. So you're gonna have 60 seconds just
Okay.
to tell them a little bit about that as the elevator goes up, right? So you only get 60 seconds in the elevator. Right after that, I'm gonna ask you any tips, tricks, hacks, or books you've come across in the last year that have helped
Hmm.
you monetize your mental capital. And I would love if you would limit those tips, tricks, hacks, or books you've come across in the last year to this idea of like starting a newsletter, starting a blog, starting YouTube, any tips, tricks, hacks, or books you've come across that have helped you identify or become better at that process of monetizing mental capital by building an audience or building a base. So
Hmm.
we'll put that one in your subconscious. You just stepped
Okay.
into the elevator. Guy next to you says,
Elevator.
"I'm an 8-figure Amazon seller. What do you do?"
Cool. So I have been helping 7, 8, and 9 figure sellers scale on Amazon with profitable ads. And the way I have been doing this is with the help of data and AI. And these are the two important ingredients. When, you know, any seller kind of sells on Amazon, they think that they're in the business of selling products, but actually they're in the process of monetizing their data, right? Everything starts with data, and the focus of me and my company is to start with data and end with data and use that to accelerate your growth. Fail fast, fail often, make sure that you've got the mindset of end of lifing your products that are not working and not being invested in it forever. So we help identifying what it is that is kind of failing and what it is that is winning, and then accelerating the victories and keep moving forward.
Beautiful, man. You nailed that on the head. He said, "Oh, cool, thanks," and had to walk out of the elevator. So you nailed the timing there,
Oh, did
down
I?
down to a minute.
Yes.
Good job. Tips, tricks,
Okay.
hacks, or books that you've come across in
Mhm.
the last year that have helped you monetize your mental capital.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a book, but it's not a book that I came across in the last year. I actually came across this about 30 years ago. And
Okay, I like it.
yeah. So this is a book by Eliyahu Goldratt, and the book is called The Goal. And I reread it last year because I was, needing to come up with internal processes that were highly efficient and were based on data. And so, what is this book about? It's about understanding that when an organization or a process is in operation, it is bound to find bottlenecks in different places, right? There's going to be bottlenecks in your process, in your overall operations. And your job as an operator is to find where the bottleneck is right now and ease that bottleneck. It will appear in some other place sooner or later. And that's just the dynamic nature of any organization or organism. Like it will show up somewhere else, but then you will go and attack that and even that out and so on. So it's about understanding what is the weakest chain in the operations and where you have things piling up and easing those either by adding more resources or by automating that process and so on. So how is this tied to the things that I've been doing? Well, I have been using data a lot, and now that I'm using data in a way that I can see things, from a 10,000-foot view, as well as from a very microscopic view, I can actually zoom in and zoom in and zoom out to find all those bottlenecks and actually go to them and ease them out. So definitely helped my thinking, and I shared this with my own team, and we've been working on this easing out bottlenecks thinking. But it's also applying to many other things that I do, including my PPC world, where I'm looking at data and seeing which things are working better than others, and it's going to change. It's just the nature of things, and you just go find them all the time, and you have a system of alerting you. It's a push and pull system where you can go to it to find the problems, or you can get alerts that come to you where you can kind of figure out things very quickly. So that's my book, and that's my inspiration for all the stuff that I'm involved in right now.
I love it. The bottleneck concept is a fascinating one, and that idea of like really narrowing it down. And then I think the other thing for me, the hardest part about the bottleneck principle has been recognizing I'll be like, okay, that's the bottleneck, but I think this one's the second bottleneck. And the funny part
Yes.
is there's no such thing as a second bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that's been hardest for me, I'm curious as to how you combat this, is not choosing to try to optimize both. Like
Mm.
focus all your energy on the first bottleneck and then see what the system does and say, oh, there's the bottleneck. And
Yeah.
like letting the system reorganize after you let go of the first bottleneck to the point
Mm-hmm.
where you're only focusing on what is the true bottleneck. How do you avoid
Mm-hmm.
optimizing ahead of time? Or like when you're like, okay, that's the bottleneck,
Yeah.
but that bottleneck over there looks really shiny. So how
Yeah.
do you avoid and only
Mm-hmm.
focus on the one that's truly the bottleneck?
So I think that bottlenecks are closely tied with throughput. So if you're expecting something out of your system, right, the throughput is what's going through, and depending on the neck, right, you can have more or less coming out, more or less high quality throughput, right? That's what we're interested in, high quality throughput. And the narrowest part of the chain is going to constrict what your throughput is going to look like. So you have to tackle that first, and then something else will appear that will affect the throughput. So checking those two things in tandem, I think it needs to be done in order to figure out whether whatever you changed in your system did actually improve the throughput, or did it make it worse, or did it not change anything at all. So it's just a measurement at two levels. Yeah.
Love it. I love it. Great advice. Thank you so much, Ritu, for joining us on this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. Really
Yeah.
appreciate your time here.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Will. Thank you so much for having me.